to us it's about 6 weeks before the actual event, so that we have time to, maybe it's 5 weeks before the event, so that we have time to review those. We have a week to review those videos and reports, and then tell us, the teams whether they need to make any changes, whether they've missed something, whether they've done something that's not compliant with the rules, or whether they're good to attend. And so that then gives a month about to plan travel to get to the event.
I suppose it's important to note those documents serve two purposes. For some of us, we review that document to show safety compliance, and that document is also then used as part of the judging of the competition. But a lot of, it is focused on the competition, but these are the documents that will give the go, no-go to teams based on a initial safety assessment.
And often it's very close in the point scoring, so the points you get from the documentation are good, winning. And that's happened many times.
But it's also important to understand that there's very few teams in the history of the competition that in this high school competition that don't pass this stage. Normally we will go back to the most notable time when teams haven't passed this stage is when there was just blatant plagiarism, and that they had their school had just copied the reports from the year before and not really changed anything other than the names. And so that's pretty much what you've got to do to not get through, unless your video content doesn't have enough.
Can I say though, too, so teachers aren't scared about doing this, I've had kids that have not had a really great enthusiasm for writing reports, and
They'll be good engineers.
but we've been able to, it doesn't have to be a wonderful presentation and a beautiful video. If you've got kids that can do a checklist and yeah, I covered everything, it doesn't have to, my team not winning either, but they can get to the point without having spent a huge amount of time on that stuff.
Can you give an example, a couple of reasons for a no-go? Not just a cheating one, but something wrong with it or what?
So in the high school competition, I don't recall us ever having given just a no-go, because we'll generally go back and say, okay, you've got something wrong, and give them a chance to rectify it. Like Brendan
shows such as something that's not working.
Unusually safety run. So last year we had to go back to a team because one team did demonstrate dropping the package on their little brother. So in the video, I mean, they were showing this.
Yeah.
So we had to go back and say, would you like to rethink how you're testing and get them to make a statement that they would no longer drop things on top of people.
That's a no-go.
So it wasn't really a no-go, it was just get a clarification. Can you confirm that you won't actually drop on people?
Making sure the frequencies of the transmitters and the video transmitters are correct. And again, often we'll go, we might say it's conditional, you've got to come back and show us that you're changing to a compliance system. Most schools these days, because of buying parts, in the early days, a lot of stuff was being bought overseas into the country and it wasn't compliant with our frequency management rules. But now people can buy from local hobby shops and they are compliant. So, as Dennis said, they are technically a non-compliance, but particularly at the high school level, we try really hard to work with the schools to get people through rather than say no. Whereas on the open challenge, we quite often get things which show a safety breach, and it's quite clear that no, we're not progressing with that. But at the high school,
So the example Brendan gave before of where they were doing something that really wasn't in the spirit of the competition, that they were going to have a drone, carrying a drone and releasing it, which is good, but really if you're just going to land a drone, everyone should just do that. So we went back to them, and that team didn't end up coming because they didn't, in their schedule, didn't have enough time to come up with an alternate solution.
So we didn't give them a no-go, we just said you can resubmit. We'll give you, I think we gave a week to resubmit an alternate.
Because it's just, at that point, there's not a huge amount of time for someone to develop a completely new drop system. But the most common thing at that point for us to go back to is the video, because the video needs to show the aircraft taking off, the aircraft dropping the package, so that we know that if they drop the package, the aircraft is not suddenly going to become very unstable, and that they can land the aircraft. So that's just because at the event, there's all the other competitors there. We have a safety distance, but we want some confidence that the aircraft that they're going to bring will fly and they can fly it. And so the most common thing to go back is that the video just doesn't show those three things that we need to see.
And they can also, everyone can ask us questions too. So what, if a team does come up with a radical way of doing things, then what we would prefer is that they email us as the judges and say, we're proposing this radical thing. Is that okay? You know, so that there's not a surprise. So this problem with the team last time is it was a complete surprise. They just submitted this completely crazy radical thing and we had to say, no, we can't do that. But most teams will email us first and check. So as long as there's good communication, it's fine.
High school, if they're over 18, they appear to be over 18, we'll possibly ask them for some evidence that they're actually a high school student.
And because it's international,
yes.
well, and it varies because teams come from all over the world. So I mean, like last year we had 7 teams from California, we had Chinese teams, Malaysian teams. I mean, so Polish teams. I mean, so yeah, it depends on their definition of high school. So we're kind of relaxed as long as they're sort of at high school. But some of them are homeschooled. I mean, so we've had homeschooled kids too.
So that's the reason why we don't. They're the reasons why we don't set strict limits. We say, basically someone who's studying high school, whether they're physically going to a school or not. So one of the changes, and I'm still working on this part, is that we had a 32-page rules document, which is a hard slog for high schools, especially at the lower end of the age, to read that document. And I'm trying to bring it down to, it's currently 12 pages, but I've got to add back in the figures. And I also did a reading level assessment of the introductory paragraph. Someone else who's today.
No, I've got time today. I mean next time.
So I did a reading of our previous rules document. I did a reading level assessment, as in terms of the tools online. You can paste your text in and tell you what reading level. And it said you needed an undergraduate degree to read that paragraph, the introductory paragraph, on the first time and understand it. So I realised we had a problem, and so I'm in the process of rectifying that so that hopefully it's more straightforward for the teams to get across. A lot of that reducing the sizes, I've taken out things in the rules that aren't really a rule, like the schedule it's not really in the rules, it sort of gets in the middle, before it used to be in the middle of the rules document. But by taking out, just having it on the website, it'll be only on one place, and it's not sort of confusing for what's the actual rules that are in. The qualification process is largely unchanged from previous years with the reports and videos. We used to have, each team would have 1 chance at flying, and in that process they would make 3 drops. This time around we're going to have, teams will have 2 rounds of flying, so they'll have 2 10-minute turns, and in each 10 minutes they can drop the payload twice. So that's a total of 4 drops in their 20-minute time, and the best 3 drops are counted. So the score that gets calculated by the distance and whether it passed the protection stage or not, the best 3 drops will be counted towards their score. So they can, out of those 4, we don't need perfection, but we used to go, in the early years, we used to go for the best drop, the best score, but then that had a pretty big element of chance. So some teams would just get really lucky and it would land in Outback Joe's lap, and they sort of win by a bit of chance. They wouldn't have that have 2 drops that went nowhere near and 1 drop right on.
Yeah, one player just accidentally fell out.
So that's why we go with the 3 drops to try and get consistency, but by going best 3 and 4, we're not up to perfection anymore. So still more rules. So as I said a bit earlier, there used to be a timing component to how long you were between the hurdles sort of counted. That got really complex for the teams to sort of anticipate. They don't have a system like that. It's hard for them to practice for that. It was a technical, complex system for us to run. We had lasers, we had cables going everywhere, and so we're not going to do that anymore. Sorry, that was my idea. It's my idea to put it in. It's my idea to get rid of it. So a big change this year. There won't be any scrutineering flights. In previous years, teams would have to fly their aircraft on the first day. They would have to do static scrutineering, and then they would have to do a flight to show that the scrutineers that their aircraft is actually flight worthy, and they're ready for competition. It also sort of served as a bit of a nerve settler. but it also absorbs a large amount of time. So it takes up a lot of time, and we're trying to reduce the span of competition to just 2 days without needing any weather contingency days. There won't be any scrutineering flights. At about lunchtime on the first day, we'll go straight into the first competition flights. And that means that the judging will be slightly different, because presentation, some teams will still be doing their presentation to judges, whilst other teams are flying. So it'll sort of be the judging will be split up between the judging team. We'll be even more sort of strict on making sure the video submissions are adequate to show that piloting competence, that we can tell they can take off. If the landing in the video is sort of very dicey, and sometimes they are, if they've left it to the last minute and it's blowing a gale when they need to take their video because they've got to send it in the next hour, we'll probably have to ask for a resubmission or something. And when it comes to submissions, the key thing is to get something in. So if you meet the deadline and there's something wrong, we'll generally say, right, can you resubmit based on this part? If you don't get something in by the deadline, plus there's a couple of days of grace with points penalties, if you don't get something in by then, it's just a no-go. We're pretty strict on once we get past our timeline, that if you haven't got an entry in, unless you can show pretty solid evidence, and John's, a robotics professor, and he looks pretty hard at the digital evidence. So unless they can show pretty good evidence that they tried to deliver it on time, they won't get through. So we used to have a team limit. We never got to the team limit, but we're going to increase it, because one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to change the types of teams that are coming from